Today, we are diving into a topic that is probably pretty uncomfortable. It is a little bit for me, but I just feel so compelled to talk about it. I'm pushing past that. But it's absolutely crucial, I think, to bring this to the forefront right now. So, we're going to be discussing why Christians should be engaged in politics. If you've ever felt like you should steer clear of the political arena because it feels too divisive or disconnected from your faith, then this episode is for you. Christians can't afford to sit on the sidelines any longer. Jesus didn't, the apostles didn't, and neither should we. We'll dive into the biblical foundations of political engagement, unpack some historical insights from the likes of C.S. Lewis, Spurgeon, St. Augustine, and discuss why the culture war we're facing is something Christians must not shy away from. Yes, we'll also talk about this misleading dialogue around Christian nationalism and why the far left is trying to paint all believers with this broad stroke. America was founded on biblical principles that give us inerrant rights and freedoms under God. So let's break it all down. Let's start with the foundation. Scripture. Romans 13:1 says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, but for there is no authority except that which God has established." That's right. The very idea of authority comes from God. So why should we, as followers of Christ, ignore or disengage from something that God himself ordained? Jesus also spoke directly about authority. When questioned about paying taxes to Caesar, Matthew 22:21, Jesus replied, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's." This doesn't mean withdrawing from civic responsibilities. It means recognizing that, yes, the government has its place, but our ultimate allegiance is to Christ. And when the government oversteps its boundaries, we are called to push back in truth and righteousness. Jesus exhibited this also with the Pharisees. The Pharisees were a governing authority in their community. There's governing authorities in our community. Jesus went to the temple. He turned over tables. He showed righteous anger for the things that they were doing that was against God's will, against God's truth, and against the character of the Lord. Proverbs 31:8-9 commands us to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. Jesus was revolutionary in his wisdom and truth because he uplifted those who are marginalized. He was the first one to come alongside and promote women and their purpose and their need in the community. He was the first one to say, take care of the orphans, the widows. We must give care to people that are suffering, who don't have as much, who need help. That is our call. That is our mission in this world. How can we do this effectively if we are disengaging from the very things that create the governance of our communities? It's not just about voting. It's about standing up for the vulnerable, the oppressed, the marginalized. And that starts by participating in the system that creates those laws that we all must abide by. Allie Beth Stuckey says it best when she says, policy matters because people matter. Statistics show that only 61% of eligible Christian voters actually vote. Let that sink in. A huge portion of believers are missing from the entire conversation. Meanwhile, laws are being passed that directly violate biblical principles. From abortion laws to attacks on religious freedoms and family, staying silent doesn't feel like an option. C.S. Lewis put it this way: Christianity is not compartmentalized. He warned us that following Christ requires all of us, our time, our work, and yes, our political engagement. If you are a believer, your faith should impact everything that you're doing, including choices that the community is making. Are we not called to be in this world, not part of it, but in it? And how can we do that if we're self-isolating from the very things that impact the lives of others? Then we have Charles Spurgeon, who also said, "Of all things under the sun, religion is the least likely to make men cowards." Yet so many Christians are acting cowardly, afraid of being labeled or canceled by the world. Why? The gospel has always been countercultural. If we're more afraid of being judged by other believers or secular cities than standing up for the truth, then I would say we've lost the plot. If Spurgeon's words don't convict you, maybe St. Augustine will. He was a theological nomad for our time, he argued in the City of God that we have a dual citizenship, one in heaven, but also on earth. God put us here for a reason. We're not to be self-isolating and only keep to ourselves. No, we are called to be out in the world. Think about the apostles in the Bible who lost their lives proclaiming Jesus, who went into town after town knowing that they were going to face persecution from the governing bodies, from their own church. This is what is our call. Our call is to stand for the truth. And our opinion does matter. And this world does need the light of Christ. How are we doing that if we're not even engaging in the things that affect everyday life? If we disengage politically, we abandon our duty in our earthly cities. And let's be real, those cities are suffering right now. Policies promoting injustice, immorality, and hostility to faith are becoming a mainstay. Augustine knew that Christians must not ignore these realities. We can't be so ethereal that we're just waiting for heaven. Otherwise, why would God not just make us angels to dwell with him there? He put us here for a reason. We're called to be the gospel, for our life to be an outward testimony of his goodness and what truth is, so people can see the light. They can be brought to the light. That is our mission. And how would we do that if we're disengaged from the things that rule over our way of life? Fast forward to today, and you'll see Christians have been so quiet here. I can speak to here more because there are Christians standing boldly in their faith, proclaiming Jesus and willing to die in other parts of this world. It's like we've retreated here in America. Look at the cultural landscape: abortion, gender ideology, the breakdown of the family, the attack on religious freedom. Where has the church been? In 2021 alone, the U.S. Congress introduced more than 400 bills restricting religious freedoms. We weren't allowed to go to church. Globally, persecution is on the rise. 360 million Christians are facing high levels of persecution all around the world. There's countries right now that our country is supporting that are throwing Christian preachers and priests in jail, closing their churches. It's something that we're not privy to, and we don't feel like it's that of a big of a deal because it's not in our face. But this is serious. We can't stay silent because we're afraid of being too political or divisive. The stakes are too high. We all know that Roe v. Wade had an overturn that's been decades in the making for reasons that it was not, according to our highest court of the land, a legal type of law. And now it's back in the hands of the states. Would that have happened had pro-lifers and people of faith stayed so quiet? This has been a hot button issue. This is an example of having persistence and consistency in messaging to help people see truth and see light. The far left has been quick to brand Christians as extremists under this new term, Christian nationalism. And let me be clear, Christian nationalism is not what Christians are. Christian nationalism, as it's framed by progressives, is this deceptive tactic to scare believers away from political engagement, to also paint Christians with a broad stroke that we are all in this extremist type of mindset. It conflates patriotism, biblical values, and advocacy for moral justice with this form of theocratic control. We are not a theocracy. And I'm not insinuating we create a theocracy. That is not what God called us to do. And that is not what America wants or needs. The left is trying to lump all believers into this extreme group because it helps villainize all Christians, the entire faith. So why are we not speaking up? Their message is to demonize the truth with which we stand for as believers. So how are we supposed to respond to this? First, we look to Jesus. He's the example. He wasn't afraid to speak truth. He wasn't afraid to engage with the governance of his communities, but he did it with grace, wisdom, and unshakable courage. Remember, Jesus didn't shy away from confronting the political authorities, whether it was Herod, Pilate, or the Pharisees. He didn't allow the world to distort God's will, to distort God's word, God's truth, and we should not either. Jesus calls us to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, Matthew 10:16. That means when we need to be smart in how we engage, but never lose the moral authority that God has provided to us to live under. Ephesians 6:12 reminds us, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil. When we engage in politics and political conversations, we must always remember that our fight is spiritual. Even when the battlefield looks like it's mired in murky political legalese talk. Engaging in politics doesn't mean we force our beliefs on others. It means we defend the rights of all, rooted in the love and justice of God. America was founded on biblical principles that recognize the inerrant rights that God provided all of us and the freedoms that we are given as image bearers of Him. Our Declaration of Independence says we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. This is why Christians must defend these truths. They are God-given, sovereign, righteous, and just. So how do we go from here? First, reject the lie that politics is a dirty word or unworthy of our engagement as Christians. Politics shapes policy, and policy shapes lives. Second, educate yourself. Get involved in your local, state, city things that are going on. It doesn't mean you have to run for governor. It doesn't mean you have to get on the state house of representatives, but knowing what's on the ballot and making your voice heard by simply taking the time to go vote is worthy of your time. It's worthy of your attention. And I am challenged to say, if that is something that you are taking seriously, God is going to relay to you and convict you in a way of how to handle this, how to vote, what to do. A staggering 40 million Christians did not vote in the last election. That's wild. If we're not voting, we're just handing over all of this policy, all this community governance over to those who oppose God and don't believe in God's truths. How can we stand in conviction that that's the best choice? Maybe God is calling you not to vote in this election. That's one thing, but to just literally remove yourself from it all, I don't believe that's the picture He would have. If we're given the right to vote, if we're given the right to engage in this way, because we are, why are we not utilizing that? Why are we not utilizing that for God's kingdom? Finally, be bold. Jesus wasn't silent, and we shouldn't be either. Luke 12:48 says, "To whom much is given, much will be required." It is a privilege and a gift to live in a place that we live and to have the freedoms that we have. A lot of people look to our nation as an example. We're not perfect, and there are faults everywhere, and I think that has been something that's been a gift of recent, that I don't think any of us can ignore all the things that have been going on that we were not aware of, that we did not give enough attention to. But once you know the truth, you can't go back and pretend like you don't know it. What are you doing to help encourage biblical living, biblical rights, God-given rights that people, human beings, every single human being on this planet has been given? If you could simply vote to help influence that, can't you? Can't you do that? We've been given truth, justice, and love. How can we use that to influence the world for Christ? Let's, I think, reclaim this conversation as Christians, being able to talk about this. Can we not break down the barrier, the taboo, the things that are holding us back from engaging in this, and the right and the wrong way to do it? We have an example. All these people out in the world are just letting it fly, but we have a perfect example of how to handle this. It doesn't need to invoke fear or angst in us, because we know if we follow the light of Christ, if we follow how God has ordained us to live, how He has given us a perfect example of how we can measure this and handle this and deal with this aspect of our life here on earth as citizens here too, we shouldn't be fearful of that. We have something to look to help hold us accountable, to help us know how to do this the best way possible. Jesus was courageous. I think we should work on reclaiming our space in this public square as believers. Help shine the light out of love for our neighbors and a desire to see God's justice prevail. We step into action. We step into just giving our time to researching what is going on, especially in your local area, and how can you impact and influence God's presence in that? Because the policies do shape how we live. They do shape where our resources are going to, who truly is getting the resources to help them when they need it, when they're suffering, when the reason that we pay taxes is going to causes that are actually helping support our community. God called us to community. We should most certainly care about that. We're not here to just be sequestered and live our life quietly and meager. Don't bother us. We're just waiting to get to heaven. That's not what we were called to do. We were called to live in action. Jesus did. Let's emulate him. Let's live as he did. Remember, your voice matters. And I think now more than ever, that's so apparent of all the corruption and the secularism that has been pervasive in all of our communities. How can we have a greater influence? We need to be out there. We need to be actively participating in the needs that we can meet as Christians right in our back door, right in our home. Teach your children how to be engaged. It's a big, hard conversation. It's one that I don't feel like Christians should be removed from. It's a huge part of our life here. It's a huge part of our ability to help. Not all of us have the resources, but when we pull our resources together, our tax money and our churches and all of these other ways that we can give to organizations that offer resources to others, when we pool our resources together, we can make huge impact. And these laws matter because it indicates how we are to live and what is accepted and not. Just speak truth. It doesn't require a political science degree. It doesn't require to be divisive or cause problems. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus simply spoke truth, and he was active in his community. He didn't just sit under a tree and wait for people to walk by. He walked his whole life being a missionary for Christ. He impacted every town and city he visited. And he was not afraid to speak to authority. He was not afraid to talk and be engaged and hopefully impart truth, love, mercy, grace to people so they can see what is truth and what does matter. And I just feel compelled to talk about that. We have been dealing with a whole season of just constant chaos. And you do have something you can do that's going to help make a positive impact. And it's not for naught, because your action is showing others, yeah, we should care about this. Your influence to get involved is going to shine light where God's light needs to be. We should not remove ourselves from this conversation, from this arena of our world. We are citizens here too, while we are here. How can we do the best to promote God? How can we do our best to engage in a way that is helping others see the testimony of who God is and who we are and how we engage in the world? So I'm calling you into some type of intentional action today, intentional thought about this subject. I want to hear what you have to say in the comments. So I'm bracing myself for a lot of things. Hopefully I've found my people in this community that we're building together, and we can talk about this and share things and thoughts that we have in a dignified, Jesus-like manner so that we can help share things that each of us have been emboldened to talk about, to research about, to share about, and help all of us make conscious decisions and intentional choices to impact God's kingdom for God's glory. So do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Cannot wait to talk to you soon. Bye.